While the Philadelphia 76ers took care of business on their own end, improving their championship chances this offseason, the NBA world never sleeps, and that was no more evident than the Knicks making another big splash this offseason by trading for Karl-Anthony Towns. This is one of the more shocking deals that I can remember in really NBA history, or at least modern NBA history, one that basically came out of nowhere and happened so shortly before training camp. So I want to dive into my take on this from both sides of things. I honestly, my overall takeaway, to put it short, is I don't love it for either team, and I want to get into why I believe that is the case there. But do want to dive into everything we went into. So start off with the full notification, the Shams bomb. By the way, a little disappointing that we don't get Woj in the mix anymore. We just know who the layup, who it's coming from. So I do hate that. But he tweeted out that the Knicks have acquired Karl-Anthony Towns from Minnesota for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick via Detroit. As I mentioned, this is a move that's incredibly shocking to me. We know who Karl-Anthony Towns is as a player, coming off a season which he averaged 21.8 points per game, 8.3 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 50.4% from the field, and 41.6% from three, which is some really good efficiency there. 28 years old, 97.1% of his threes are assisted, and 34.4% of all of his shot attempts come from beyond the three-point line. This was a guy who, to his credit, and by the way, before I dive into the takes here, shout out, huge respect to both Julius Randle and Karl-Anthony Towns here, who are guys who I think did a lot for their respective franchise. And I do think this is an example of being a bit of a cold world out here. That Karl-Anthony Towns had lived through the dark days of the Minnesota Timberwolves and helped carry them to their most successful season in decades to this point. For Julius Randle, he was a guy that took on the challenge in New York. That when Kevin Durant didn't want to go there, when Kyrie Irving didn't want to go there, it was really Julius Randle that took them towards this step towards relevancy in a way where they haven't been in quite some time. That we remember the dark days, the Jeremy Lin era, all these guys of, just being a fun story, if anything, but really the Knicks just kind of sitting off on the sideline. That is until very recently, really these past 2 years, really, where the Knicks are back in the front and center. And I do think that's good for the NBA as a whole. And I don't think that happens without Julius Randle. I think, to be perfectly honest, a lot of the flowers that are handed to Jalen Brunson, and he deserves it for his level of play. But I think Randle deserves a great deal more credit than he gets for paving the way. And it is kind of disappointing to me to see him just kind of shipped off to Minnesota as the root of this in my mind. It comes down to money here. And why I think that's the case, well, I'll start off with from the Timberwolves perspective here to get off things. Let me pull up the Karl-Anthony Towns contract and what we're particularly looking at. $49.2 million this year, $53.1 million next year, $57 million the following year, and a $61 million player option in the 27-28 season. I do think they looked at that number and said, we need to get off this. We need to hand the keys to Anthony Edwards. And ultimately, the Knicks have been involved in Karl-Anthony Towns for quite some time. Shout out to, let me pull up here, John Krasinski, I believe is how you pronounce it, does some really good work for The Athletic. I've always struggled with that one. But he tweeted out a couple kind of inside takes on it. He said, one thing to be clear on tonight. Karl-Anthony Towns did not request this trade. He never has requested a move in the 9 years here. And he continues on to say, the Wolves see this as a way of adding depth, leaning in on Edwards, McDaniels, and Reed, and lengthening the window of competitiveness. They have long coveted DiVincenzo. Randall's scoring can help. The Detroit first is a significant asset moving forward. And he continues to add that a constant drumbeat throughout the last year, plus the Knicks wanted Cat. The Knicks wanted Cat. The Knicks wanted Cat. Eerily similar to the drumbeat in Minnesota when the Wolves coveted D'Angelo Russell. It was constant until they got him. Common threat, and then, of course, the ownership that he is acknowledging here. Now, as far as the Knicks wanting Cat, I understand this is something that I think has sort of been bubbling for quite some time. Again, we know who Karl-Anthony Towns is as a player, and I do philosophically get what they're doing. That one of my critiques of this Knicks team throughout all of last season and heading into this year is I still doubted their top-end talent. This is a big swing to improve it. I don't think there can be an argument made that Karl-Anthony Towns isn't a better fit and better player for this Knicks team. He is truly probably the best shooting big man that we've seen in modern history, or really NBA history. A guy at real deal 7 foot, shooting 40% from three on high volume. That just doesn't happen a lot. And I do think that there's some really intriguing things that can be done with this Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns pick and pop situation. I do think that's basically going to be the borderline or the baseline, the foundation of everything that the Knicks do offensively. But with all that being said, from a Sixers perspective, I'm still not worried about it. Now, if you do want to check the Vegas odds here, it's clear that there is a belief in this New York team more so than was this case. Shout out to Grant Asfeth here, who does some great work covering the Dallas Mavericks as well. But he wrote this article, work with him at DraftKings Network. He writes that the Knicks passed 76 in title odds, and he continues on to say, while the addition of Towns has propelled New York up in the odds leaderboard, it has simultaneously caused the 76ers to fall behind. Philadelphia entered the offseason with strong hopes of contending behind former MVP Joel Embiid and an improved roster, but now finds it at plus 900 odds, dropping to 4th place on DraftKings Sportsbook. Despite a busy offseason where Philadelphia added stars like Paul George and veteran contributors like Andre Drummond, it now faces a stiffer competition within its conference. Oddsmakers seemingly view the Knicks as having a stronger and more balanced roster following the acquisition of Towns. The 76ers still need good fortune regarding Embiid's health and the continued development from rising star Tyrese Maxey to stay in contention. However, that was the case regardless of whatever happened with the Knicks. The addition of Towns to a conference rival like New York raises the stakes even higher for the Sixers as they look to maintain their place among the NBA's top title contenders. So a couple notes on this, and by the way, I don't want to discount Donte DiVincenzo being a part of this trade. I'm very much thrilled that the Sixers do not have to play against Donte DiVincenzo in a New York Knicks jersey, that he was an absolute pest during that series, hit a number of huge shots for that team, and I welcome him walking over to the Western Conference. They want to put that on the table. Now, a couple comments on this. For the Sixers team, I think people are still discounting the leap that Tyrese Maxey is going to take. I think there's a real case to be made that when lining up these two teams, and I will pull up the Knicks depth chart here, that the 3 of the top 4 players are on the Sixers roster. That I think Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Paul George might all be better than Karl-Anthony Towns, and that's really the debate here. Jalen Brunson, I'll give him the respect, throw him in that mix for sure. But when you look down this roster, we're talking about Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, and Karl-Anthony Towns. It's a good team. There's no way around it. But when looking at how this actually works out, to me, what my takeaway from a Knicks perspective is, they're eyeing the Boston Celtics. That I think they are diminishing the Sixers team a little bit more than they probably should. That I think Karl-Anthony Towns a pretty clean fit, a pretty seamless fit for matching up with a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. I think, to be perfectly honest, I listen to a lot of the breakdown videos on this, a lot more kind of coming from the Knicks mindset of things. I think people are very much overstating who Karl-Anthony Towns is as a defensive weapon. Yes, he's a great shooter. Yes, he's a guy that can space the floor, has his pick and pop potential, will do some cool things offensively, but he's a bad defender. There's no other ifs, ands, or buts about it. And when I start to get in these arguments, it feels like I'm fighting the Nikola Jokic debate all over again. That we're talking about advanced analytics and these weird numbers that I just don't see it. There's no stats for the deflections, which I think are important, and that's one of the things that Jokic does have in his favor. That he does do that. I don't see any of it for Cat. And by the way, this is a little telling for how dominant Joel Embiid is, but when looking at his stats against Karl-Anthony Towns, in his career has averaged 28.6 points, 9.7 rebounds, 3.2 assists in 11 games. And what's telling for how dominant Joel Embiid is I read these numbers and was like, okay, that's a fine game for him. When in reality, those are phenomenal numbers for most players here. But we know the standard that Joel Embiid has held to. Just last season, averaging 34.7 points per game, 11 rebounds, and 5.6 assists. If we get to the playoffs and it is Knicks versus Sixers, which feels destined to happen, and I pray that that is the case, Karl-Anthony Towns is straight up dog food to Joel Embiid. That he will be eating that every single possession down the floor. Joel may very seriously average 50 points per game in a playoff series against the Knicks. Even a guy like Mitchell Robinson, who I do think his injury and kind of the uncertainty moving forward was a good driving force of making this deal happen, at least pushing up the timeline or the urgency of it. That is not a guy that I fear Joel in a 7-game series. Did Mitchell Robinson have some nice moments in this Knicks vs. Sixers series? Sure, but if we have a healthy version of Joel Embiid, just add him to the list of guys that cannot guard Joel. I keep hearing all these takes over and over again about the NBA is in a better place when the Knicks are good. I'm very much looking forward to the day where I can experience that myself. But I don't think a Karl-Anthony Towns trade is one that pushes one over the edge. Did the Knicks get better? Yes. Are they in a better position than the Sixers? I think absolutely not. That when you look down the Sixers roster, I think there's such clear-cut fits for each member of the team. That you have a point guard in Tyrese Maxey. You have a true wing in Paul George. And you have the most dominant big man in the NBA in Joel Embiid. When you look at this Knicks team, it's a lot of glorified role players who know how to play their job. But I think there's so much going to be continued to put on the shoulders of Jalen Brunson. I challenge you Knicks fans who will get fired up in the comments right now. Just name for me the last NBA team to win a championship that was built around a guard under 6'2", a guy with a usage rate that I think will absolutely be top 5 in the NBA this season. I think Brunson's going to be responsible for generating offense for so many of these players. That guys that, once again, are good players, not to discount him, but the OG Anunobys of the world, the Mikal Bridges of the world, you think those guys are going to be going out and getting buckets? You think Josh Hart can just score off anything besides putbacks? And I know the things that he does of value, rebounding the basketball, playing defense. There's other things here, but for actually generating points, it's really only Brunson and Cat. That's going to be the show. It's going to be a 2-man game in New York. And I just think there's a lot more ways that this Sixers team can go. There's a lot more versatility in this Philadelphia team. And for now, I like this response from Tyrese Maxey on media today. But he was asked about the outlook, how they stack up in the East. And Maxey's response was basically, we're focused on the Philadelphia 76ers. We get ourselves right. We focus on playing our best ball, and then we can talk about how we stack up against the East. That has to continue to be the mentality moving forward. But to me, I'm not backing off my take that this Sixers team, it's going to feel so good to watch them defeat this Knicks team in the playoffs. You guys can keep the receipts. You can note all that, but I just feel even stronger about that. Looking forward to one of the budding rivalries around the NBA to continue. Shout out to the Knicks for committing to it, trying to strike while the iron's hot and continuing to get better. But I still think there's a little bit to be desired, a little bit more that they need to take things if the cards are going to fall in their direction there. And I think they might have used up just about all the assets that they could have had. So enjoy paying Karl-Anthony Towns that $61 million a couple years from now. And hopefully the Sixers have rode down Broad Street a couple of times during that point. But let me know what you guys think in the comments here. Are you more worried about the Karl-Anthony Towns trade than I am? I do think that is a guy that is not built to win. I do think that's a guy that's not built for the bright lights of New York. I know he's from North Jersey. I know he's from around the area, but we also know who he is as a person and kind of how he acts, how he's looked in Minnesota. And it's not coincidental that there wasn't a lot won until Anthony Edwards had started to change things there. So whenever there are these type of blockbuster trades, you do got to ask the why here. And I think there's a little bit more unanswered on the Minnesota side of things than would like to be the case. But ultimately, once again, do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in this video here. Make sure you are smashing that subscribe button if you haven't yet. We're going to be doing things even bigger and better in year 2 here on Sixers Digest. So I want you along for the ride. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop your comments below, and I'll be talking with you next time. Peace.